Recording. Fantastic. All right, so welcome everyone to the training showcase on WiLD Academy by the Wisconsin Leadership Development Project. So great to see everyone here. My name is Sachiko Osawa, and I'm the Membership Engagement and Community of Practice Coordinator at the Leading Change Network, and I'm coming to you from Sweden. So as you're joining, please introduce yourself in the chat so we can know who's in the room. And please also rename yourself with your first name, location, and pronouns. You can do so by clicking on your own name in the lower left-hand corner of your video screen and choosing rename. So as people are doing that, welcome. So this is one of our final learning events for this year. And I'm sure I'm not alone when I say that 2020 has been an unpredictable, stressful, and challenging year for all of us. But it's also the year that has reminded us the importance of and the urgency of the work that we do, the strength of our community to adapt, and at the core of it, what it means to exercise leadership and the way that our network defines it, to accept responsibility for enabling others in the face of uncertainty. And as you know, we are committed to supporting our community in this work. So let me dive right into this important work by first introducing the Leading Change Network, who we are and what we do. So the Leading Change Network, or LCN, is a global community of organizers, educators, and researchers. We develop and support new civic leadership that organizes communities to build power and create change. And there are people all over the world creating change using the LCN pedagogy, which was developed by Marshall Gantz and his associates. And rather than having them work alone, we want our community to come together and learn from one another to organize more effectively. And we do this through our 4 programs. First, to create opportunities to learn the organizing pedagogy. Second, coaching and supporting leaders on the ground to build successful campaigns. Third, creating space for the community to learn together from each other's experiences. And finally, supporting leaders to educate others and lead others in their community. And more importantly, we are a member-driven organization with currently over 350 members from 49 countries. As a member, you are part of an exciting global community that you can make connections with and learn from, and you will have access to exciting learning events such as this one, various training and learning resources, and opportunities to get coaching. So if you're already trained in this pedagogy and are not yet a member, we invite you to become one from our website. If you haven't been trained in the pedagogy yet, we are starting with orientation sessions on organizing in January. So be sure to keep an eye out for more information about that and participate in that. All right, so here's what today's session will look like. We'll start off with a quick relationship building exercise in breakout rooms, and then a presentation about the WiLD Academy. We'll have time for a brief interlude for some clarifying questions before inviting the teams that participate in the Academy to share about their experiences. And afterwards, we'll open it up for questions from you all, and then conclude with a quick evaluation and announcement of what's coming up ahead, including WiLD Academy 2021. And finally, just to make sure that everyone is comfortable with Zoom, you should be seeing a window similar to what's on this slide. The mute button is on the lower left-hand corner of your video screen. Please make sure that you're on mute when you're not speaking so that there's no audio disturbances. We would love to see you on video, so have it on as much as possible. This session will be recorded and the recording shared on our website. We'll also be taking screenshots along the session throughout the session. So if you don't want to appear in them, send us a private message and we'll make sure that you're not featured. Zoom, as you know, has a great chat function, so please use the chat to share questions, reflections, and resources. Jake will be our chat board monitor to raise any questions that you may have in our Q&A afterwards. Thanks, Jake. Right, and if you have any tech issues, my colleague Jaffrin will be on support, so please put in the chat at tech and she will give you the help you need. Now, I would like for us to go into our breakout rooms for a quick exercise to get to know one another. We have about 130 people who register for this event from all over the world. So once we open the breakout room, you will be invited to a breakout room in groups of 3s. And we'll take about 5 minutes to share the following: your name, where you're from, your organization, and what are you looking forward to learning in today's session. So when Jaffrin opens the room right now, you should be seeing a join button. Click on that and that should take you to the breakout rooms. If you find yourself in a breakout room alone, don't panic. There's an ask for help button. So click on that, will help you out. And once you come back to the main room, I'd like to ask everyone to share what they discussed in the chat. All right, so I think everyone is moving into the breakout rooms now. Happy relationship building. Wonderful. Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back. Maybe everyone's coming back. Hello, I hope you had a nice conversation. So as you are rejoining us, I would love to hear what you discussed in terms of what are you looking forward today to learning in today's session. So if you could take a moment just to share what you discussed in the chat, that would be fantastic. All right. Engaging people who don't use the internet, build a training program to train staff. Public narrative is an organizing tool. Recruit and train employees. Great, thank you for sharing. Amazing. All right, so today's session is, let me share my screen. Here we go, there we go. Okay, so today's session is a training showcase. And the purpose of a training showcase is to bring in best practices and examples of how people are training and adapting the pedagogy in various contexts. And one question that trainers and organizers may have is, how do we design our training in a way that best supports campaigns on the ground? And how do you do that when you're faced with the urgencies of a global pandemic and an upcoming presidential election? So in today's session, we're joined by Dan Grandoni and his team from the WiLD Wisconsin Leadership Development Project to share with us about the WiLD Academy, a 2-month online course focused on enabling teams to develop campaigns and rise to the challenges of the moment. Dan is a Wisconsin native and founder of WiLD Project. Moved by his faith and experience working in the inner city schools of Houston, Texas, Dan was called to community organizing. And for the past 21 years, he has built grassroots organizations in struggling communities around the world, worked in Missouri as a faith-based organizer, and on Barack Obama's 2008 presidential campaign. He co-founded LCN and since has trained in student solidarity with leaders across many social justice movements. So as you listen to Dan and his team present, I encourage you to share questions, reflections, comments in the chat. We'll have time for Q&A afterwards. So Dan, thank you for joining, and I'm handing over the floor to you.
All right. Hello, everyone. So I want to start by saying thank you. Grateful for the opportunity, Sachiko Leading Change, to share a little bit of the WiLD story and to invite you into joining us for the 2021 WiLD Academy if you're looking to do any building in the new year in various parts of the state and the world. So just by way of kind of setting this up, I think we want to do a few things there by way of sharing our story. One is on the front end, we're just going to take a few minutes to give you a little bit of a context, highlight our team, the curriculum that we developed, and then we're going to transition into the fun part of hearing some stories from the field of what people actually did with the training and how they developed campaigns in Houston, Texas, here in Western Wisconsin, and in Nigeria. So, and then the final part, hope is to open it up for your questions and just to have a free-flowing discussion. So how's that sound? A couple of head nods, some thumbs ups. Mecca's on board, that's a good sign. So yeah, where did this all come from? It's actually 5 years ago, almost exactly 5 years ago. a team of us decided to launch the WiLD project. And in many ways was animated by, I think, as probably many people's organizing efforts across this country and the world through struggle. I think learning the hard lesson one too many times that simply reacting and mobilizing in moments of crisis is no longer enough to win. We learned that lesson here a few years back when collective bargaining was challenged, and we mobilized over 100,000 people in the streets for a week straight and still lost. And no, that was not an isolated incident by any means, and a lot of different causes in organizing efforts. So WiLD very much was inspired by this question that we often put front and center in the training that we do, that every organizer should first ask the question, not what is my issue, but who are my people? And with a belief in doubling down and really investing in our greatest resource, our people here in the state, launched WiLD as a way to build organizing capacity across broad spectrum of communities here that we're organizing in a variety of spaces. That's not just for people's individual growth and development, but also in light of wanting to see the ball move and change, particularly in communities where people have been systematically locked out of opportunity. So part of the work, besides the pre-COVID, the in-person trainings that we were doing, was creating support and scaffolding for the campaign work that emerged across the state. To date, I want to celebrate, along with a whole lot of other people, close to 2,000 people that we've had the opportunity to work with, learn with, and see move into action. So, rewinding a little bit, a few months back, early March, I was actually in this very room, laid up on my back, not able to get tested with many of the symptoms of COVID, and I was not alone, as we all started to realize the harsh realities of the pandemic, and seeing right before our eyes literally all of the trainings that we had scheduled for the year, all of the campaign work be turned on end. And also being here in the swing state of Wisconsin, a state that many consider to be the tipping point state for the presidential election. So the stakes were high, and we realized we needed to do something to make sure that folks who wanted to organize in this moment had a chance to do that. So that's when I think we went back to I think one important lesson to lift up. And it's part of the beauty of this global network in leading change is, when possible, don't try to reinvent the wheel. Went back and were able to build upon one of the main thought leaders behind this whole framework, Marshall Gans, the important work and learning that he and teams of people that, show of hands, how many people have been part of the LOA, Leadership Organizing Action course online? Yeah. In solidarity with you all, we're able to draw on a lot of those lessons learned of what it looks like to take this organizing training in person and bring it online. And also to reach out to our friends in the Middle East with Ahel, who helped us think this through, and even here in the States with We Own It. So we decided, the other thing was, we needed to actually make this happen before the presidential got in full swing. And 100+ organizers were brought into the state, and it became much more challenging to do training work and build something on the road to the election. So we pulled together a team to make this happen. You may see a few familiar faces in this lineup. Brought together, this is kind of the core training team, Neka Akubezi from Milwaukee, now with us by way of Houston, Texas. Bill Hogsess with the Farmers Union out of Western Wisconsin. Jake Waxman out of LA, has been with us from the very beginning in growing WiLD, along with Abel Kano, who came in with Mice, Anna as guest trainers, and Ben Barker, who held down the technology. So this was the team who helped design, again, building on a lot of really important work and learning before us, and decided to develop an 8-week version of the course to launch and be concluded by the end of June. So we put our shingle out there, so to speak, not knowing what the response was going to be. Initially, for the first time doing this, was hoping that we maybe get 30 to 40 people, and actually had over 100 folks that applied. Ended up taking 84 participants from 2 countries, 5 states, bunch of cities, as you can see here, 25 organizations, and see along the bottom is some of the diversity. Just want to lift up. Had 58% of folks were unpaid, so coming in a volunteer capacity. And then I think the other unique thing about this training in particular for us was that 58% of folks came from communities that were smaller than 20,000 people. So little snapshot of the people. I want to invite Jake Waxman, tag him in here to give you a little bit of the overview of how we thought about the 8-week curriculum.
Yeah, thanks, Dan, and good to be with you all. Calling in from Hawaii, or the other time zone than I think most everyone here. Yeah, I think I saw hands that looked like a lot of you, maybe half, maybe even a little more, have been a part of LOA. So just going to take a couple minutes to give a sense of this curriculum. It should look pretty familiar in some ways, and I'll just highlight a few of the differences that we leaned into. So just in terms of content, you'll notice as you look at this that we went through the same LCN material, right? So we started with narrative work, we introduced the overall framework and coaching. We went into narrative, story of self, relationship building, did some work around structure, did strategy work, and then we actually had a strategy application weekend. You'll see that highlighted. And I'll just note the reason we did that, and one ways in which this course was different than LOA, is that folks came in teams. So as we were designing this course, we were grappling with the value of a distance learning course that's spread out over time and all the richness that can come from that, but also recognizing the ways in which an in-person workshop for folks, just by a show of hands, how many people have participated in person, like 2.5-day or 3-day organizing workshop? So folks have had that experience as well with the LOA, that in the in-person workshop, you're really working in a team in an intense way. And it has the value of actually giving that team a chance to actually form as a team. And so in the WiLD Academy, the vast majority of people came together as a team. And so we use that strategy application weekend for teams to actually go through the strategy breakout and think as a group, what strategy do we want to employ? Versus one person coming to the course, kind of learning about strategy and then trying to take it back to their team, where in many cases the support is a little bit more limited. And then the other thing I'd highlight in terms of content that was a little different than LOA is that we did Structure 2.0. Which is thinking about not just how do we launch a leadership team, but how do we actually structure our organization? What does our snowflake look like? Where do we need to build leadership to actually carry out our strategy effectively? Whether that's geographically, whether that's in constituency groups, young folks, teachers, different groups like that. And then we close the sessions with Story of Us and Now, and then leading into action where people begin to call and invite people to their kickoff events or to their next peaks. So then that way we kind of brought together the online and the in-person work. The other thing I'll just note in terms of process, very similar to LOA, there were kind of 3 pillars of the learning. One was the lectures, where it was similar to this. We had everyone together in a large group getting clarity around theory and concepts. The second was the small group work, where we were in sections, where folks had a chance to actually try on the practices in many cases. So actually doing story of self practice, practicing building relationships, and then reflecting on that. How is that happening in the field? And then the third pillar was the individual work, which was reading and then writing and reflection. And even though this course is not through Harvard, you don't get a certificate from Harvard at the end of it. A lot of folks actually found that time to be really valuable because it gave them a chance to reflect on their practice and to write down, what am I actually struggling with? What am I finding real insight in? And to really solidify that. And we will give comments on that writing each week as well. So that's a little overview of how we went through the time. I'll pass it back to Dan to close out this piece.
Thanks, Jake. Just want to highlight a few other things here before we open it up for a few clarifying questions. So yeah, one part of the work from the very beginning, and I think this was also a hard lesson learned, but the importance of really centering evaluation in all the training that we do on the front end. So we, in these past 5 years, have done a lot of pre and post assessments of every person that's come through the training to kind of assess where they think they're at before coming through, and then at the other end. So just to kind of highlight this, in the 5 practices that Jake just covered, that we teach, folks on a 1 to 10 scale, and the gray bar graph is where they were at beforehand, and then the orange on that back end, 1 being beginner and 10 being considering themselves advanced. Had folks by and large across the board, which we found was statistically significant, increased in their self-assessment by 3 points. So good news, we were moving in the right direction. The other thing that I was really curious about was how did it compare to the in-person trainings that we've done over 3 days? Were people able to actually take the kind of steps forward that they were in person? And it was a combination of one, a few people, number of people rating themselves a little bit lower. I think part of that was 20% of the folks who came through WiLD had never done organizing at all, which was amazing. I think the other, and a lot of feedback, probably not surprising, is the difference of having the training spread out over 8 weeks versus 3 days, and some of the individual work, reflection, reading, and time to apply what they were learning created much more space for people in their learning journey. So that was promising as we think about going forward. And then, yeah, here were some of the focus issues. I had a wide variety of, which I think really brought a level of richness to the learning across contexts, and in many cases, states and countries. Of the 15 campaigns that were created during the academy, I believe 9 were focused on the election, doing voter engagement and turnout work in the 2020 election. But yeah, then had folks working defending family farms, criminal justice work, clean water. You can see the rest: local food, Nigerian youth employment, immigration reform. So before we turn it over and hear the stories from the field, just want to maybe open it up for a couple quick questions, clarifying questions on the structure of the academy. Feel free to put them in the chat, and then we'll call on you there.
Maybe we can start, Dan, with the folks in the chat, and then see if there's others who want to raise their hand and speak them.
Sounds good.
So we have Akshita. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Akshita, do you want to come off mute and share your question that you put in the chat?
Yeah, thanks. You got it right. It's Akshita. Thanks to Dan and Jake for your time. I was just curious. I've taken the LOA course before, and I'm looking into the WiLD Academy for my team. And I was curious to know how much of an overlap there is between content that's covered within the LOA course and what is new and unique to this curriculum.
Yeah, I would say a lot of overlap on the framework. That's the main orienting piece in what we cover. I think one difference, of course, is that we're prioritizing people who come through as a team of 3 to 9. 8 weeks is not necessarily better than 16. We're expanding it to 10 weeks this next time around. Yeah, Jake, feel free. NECA, take yourselves off mute as well if you anything else you want to add on the differences between the two. And one other thing coming to mind is just in LOA, at least my understanding of how it's structured to date, is people are grouped in section. So they'll be in we're also grouped somewhat like that, where people will be in on Thursdays, they'll come together, and there may be 3-4 different teams from 4 different organizations in the same grouping. but we also took another step in making sure that there were space for teams individually to go through the work of setting up their team purpose, norms, and roles, and developing a campaign-specific strategy. Yeah, Jake, feel free to chime in there as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think mostly has been covered there. I think the one thing I mentioned earlier, which I would just highlight, is the idea that you're going through it as a team. And so in that way, the dynamics of learning are quite different. But the content, I mean, it's all drawing from the LCN framework. So the same, you know, it wouldn't be like, oh, what's public narrative is still taught in the same way. Relationship building, the very underpinnings of the framework are very similar, but the dynamics are a little bit different because the purpose is a little more oriented towards how does this team develop itself versus just individual learning.
Just for the sake of time, I'm gonna zip through a few of these questions I see in the chat. Thank you all for asking them, and then we can come back and touch on any that we miss on the back end. Yeah, each session was 90 minutes. We had a few that were 2 hours. This time around, we're making the academy 10 weeks versus 8, and every session will be 2 hours. So we meet from 4 to 6 p.m. Central Standard Time. Yeah, thank you for that question, Tracy. Yeah, the question around the sections from Olivia. We try to mix people up as much as possible. So yeah, our training team, after everyone applied, unfortunately we weren't able to take everyone, but for those that we did, we thought about, yeah, I think an eye towards diversity, realizing that there was going to be a lot of opportunity for learning across causes in many cases and contexts. Let's see here. The dates during the week or on the weekend? Yeah, during the week, Tuesday, Thursdays are the days that we have done the training or going to in 2021. Yeah, Duncan, on the question, thanks for asking, how do people decide on the focus issues? We really encourage folks beforehand. I mean, some people came into WiLD with a campaign they were currently working on and used that as a way to go deeper and broader with that effort, or in some cases to breathe some new life into it. But then there were a variety of groups who just had maybe a very vague thing that they wanted to do around, yeah, it could be anything related to the election, had folks working on food justice, and they were able to use the academy to form their team and create a strategy around that. So yeah, a lot of different entry points as far as that's considered. Let me keep on moving here. I'm getting the time cue. And then, yeah, if questions do not get answered, we will definitely come back. So on the campaign side, again, we really tried to design this certainly with the goal of people's individual growth in learning, but also as a way to catalyze and launch organizing efforts. So here are 3 that came out the other end. We did an assessment 4 months later, followed up with all the teams, many that we were actually in real close contact throughout. And we found that 4 months later, 60% of the campaigns, their teams were still meeting, we're acting together on a regular basis, we're planning next steps and strategizing. And well, here are 3 of the teams that have some inspiring stories to share. So I want to start with NECA out of Houston, Texas. Let's give NECA some love.
Thanks, Dan. Can you hear me okay? Thumbs up. Oh, word. That's what's up. I'm seeing some snaps. Hey, I missed out. So many of you familiar faces. It's good to see you.
NECA, sorry, for me, it's coming through a little fuzzy. I don't know if that's the case for others. You can still hear, but it's a little fuzzy. It's like there's like a little muffle going on.
All right, let's Is this better?
Better, just need to turn it up a little louder.
It's a little quieter now, but it's clearer.
Okay, that's curious. So much for technology.
That's better, Neka. Like I think if you just project a little bit, it's much clearer.
See, I hear you, Jake. You're saying if I speak louder, the volume will increase. I got you. I hear you. I'm picking up what you're putting down. Cool. All right. Well, I will do just that. Hey, everyone. My name is Neka Akubeze. I'm a member of, I guess, the WiLD founding core team, and was introduced to this framework by Dan, Jake, others, through WiLD. So grateful for the opportunity to be here to share what we learned, and particularly what went down in Houston. Yeah, so I was a trainer for the WiLD Academy, as well as I also brought a team through that was didn't necessarily have a campaign that they're working on, but a collection of people who had a central or general focus on criminal justice reform. So that was kind of like the broad topic, but there was no real focus for our team. And in the midst of the course, as we were understanding, I think, and unpacking the framework in our own, how we might choose to apply this in our own lives or in our own work, May 25th, a day that I will never forget. Brother George Floyd was murdered publicly at the hands of state violence, and perhaps like many of you all, there was a sort of visceral reaction, and I think that happened across the world. And in his hometown of Houston, there was sort of this heaviness. And what's interesting is in the framework, we talk a lot about like dot leadership, right? Where we're all leaders, the model where everyone kind of tries to do a thing, but there's no real connection. And it's interesting that many of us defaulted to that in the Houston community. Like there were folks who were like, well, I might try, and I'm an attorney here in Houston, and so one thing that many of us thought was, let's go out and try to represent these protesters pro bono, because they're out there doing work, and this is one tool that we have that we could use to address this issue. But we quickly, thankfully for folks who are in the academy, we quickly realized that working in a disjointed way was not effective. And there were hundreds, if not thousands, of protesters who were being arrested, right? It was very difficult for just me or just others, right? And so I leaned on relationships that I had made in law school, and we actually developed a core team. Ed Jointer, who's pictured in there on the porch of one of my colleagues' law firms, was part of the course. And so we were strategizing in the midst of trying to address these problems, and we built a core team. And our goal was to try to get those who have been arrested, who were experiencing in many ways the same violence they were protesting, get their cases dismissed, because we felt like it was an unfair exercise of power by the district attorney. And so we were able to actually develop a strategy. If we go to the next slide. We partnered with other organizations, the National Lawyers Guild, Restoring Justice, and we actually had so much more structure than just these one-off, I'll try to represent 2 people in my spare time. We actually had a coordinated effort of over 70 lawyers representing over 250, I think, clients, collectively through this coalition. And we were able to leverage our power because so many of these lawyers had these connections, had these voices. We were able to organize even some of the folks who have been arrested to put pressure on the district attorney. And ultimately, in the face of, I think, perhaps public shame on the Democratic Houston district attorney, she led the charge to dismiss I guess, issue a sweeping dismissal order for 800 protesters. And so it was a really big win for us, right, as folks who were within the course learning these tools that we were then implementing. And so it was really kind of heartening for me to see, the power of people coming together to really push back against, I think, state violence, but also the status quo, and using the tools that they had learned in some cases days or weeks before. Right, so this was not a team of experts who had studied the chapters of organizing history or something, but they had just said, okay, well, if that's team structure, let's try it out. Oh, we're going to launch. We're going to have a press conference. Okay, cool. Let's do that. That'll be our launching tactic. And then they just tried it on, and so it was just a beautiful experience to be a part of. I'm seeing the time card, so I'm going to lower my volume and await questions, I think, at the end. Thanks for letting me share, y'all.
Thanks, NECA. Let's give it up for the Houston Protester Defense Team. Yeah, want to hand it over to Bill Hogseth, coming a few miles north from Texas, where it's about to snow 5 inches today. Bill, you want to share the story of Western Wisconsin votes with us?
Yeah, thanks. Can folks hear me? Thumbs up. Good. No? Yeah, okay. Yeah, hey everybody, good to be with you. My name is Bill Hogseth, and the team that I was with was called Western Wisconsin Votes, and we were coming out of Dunn County, Wisconsin, which is a rural county in west central Wisconsin, and is also a swing county in a swing state. So our county went for Barack Obama in 2008 and 2012, and then went for Donald Trump in 2016. So this team was spawned out of the Dunn County Democrats, which is our local Democratic Party. And we had spent the year previous to this doing a lot of base building and relationship building, and we had a plan to launch local teams across the county to do all the work of voter contact and get out the vote for the November election. And then COVID hit, and all the work and the plans that we had and the teams that we were launching kind of went out the door, and we were facing uncertainty and not really knowing what kind of path to take. Suddenly we were having to do virtual campaigning and shifting all of our gears, no longer going to the doors, just phone banking, texting, and just in a totally different universe in terms of voter contact. So when Dan said that the WiLD Academy was launching, it seemed like the perfect opportunity for us to bring some of our emerging leaders, some of whom are on the call right now, into a space like where we could actually be really creative and start being think deeply about this moment that we're in and the uncertainty we're facing, and try to look for a path forward. So it was a really great kind of generative space for our folks to be creative in and learn the craft of organizing at the same time. So that project element was really great. We had 7 people come in from the Dunn County Democrats, they're pictured here. And the tactic and the strategy that emerged from the conversations was deep canvassing. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with deep canvassing, it's like canvassing in that you're talking to voters, but you're having longer conversations and you're probing the voters' lived experience and their values, and you're also creating space for that voter to share with you their own stories and help them start connecting the dots on why the election is important and personal to them. So that was the strategy, and the goal was to talk to 1,600 people, infrequent voters, people who don't frequently go to the elections, and help them clarify for themselves why voting would be important in this election. And there was a really nice dovetail with deep canvassing as a tactic, and the storytelling aspect of deep canvassing, as well as the public narrative work that the folks did in the WiLD Academy. Some of the successes we had was, I'd say, when we got out of the training, we had 4 months, a really short runway before the election hit. And all that work that our team did in terms of clarifying their norms, clarifying their purpose, how they were going to run their meetings, how they were going to work through challenges. It really allowed our team to be very flexible in the face of all the uncertainty and the things coming at us. And when we had to make adjustments, the team had the way of working through those and clarifying what their roles were and adjusting on the fly. So I think that team structure work was really, really invaluable. At the end of the day, we trained 100 volunteers in deep canvassing. We had 800 conversations. We dialed 20,000 phone numbers. But I would say one of the challenges that we experienced was how to retain volunteers in action. Of those 100 volunteers that we trained, only about 10 of them actually became really highly engaged deep canvassers. So one of the questions that we've had was, how could we have supported people better who came through our training experience, provide them the coaching they need to feel like they can do this sort of emotionally challenging work of talking with people and probing their stories. I mean, strangers, you're actually just calling a stranger out of the blue, and then maybe 10 or 15 minutes later, you're getting a really, really deep story out of them. And these can be challenging conversations. So we really learned that to hold people in action and support them, that a stronger coaching network is a really, really important aspect for deep canvassing to be successful and lift more people up in action. And we won Wisconsin, so we're pleased with that.
Thanks, Bill. Give it up for Western Wisconsin votes. Last but not least, I want to turn it over to Joshua and Adenike, if she is on, with the Nigeria Youth SDGs Network.
Hi everyone, Joshua here. I don't know if Adenike is on, but I'll just do the honors by talking about our work in Nigeria. So I would say it was by coincidence that I got to meet with Dan and then learn about the WiLD project. First in April, I was saddled with the task. I and my team were saddled with the task of trying to organize young Nigerians to advocate for an action plan that has been around for about the past 10 years, but nothing has been done by it, by government or anybody. So the first line of action for us was, how do we organize young people across Nigeria? Nigeria has about 37 states, that's including the federal capital, which is in Abuja. And then we're talking about a country of about 70 million youths, most of them between the ages of 15 and 35. So then the question is, how do we organize these people? We do not have presence across Nigeria. And I signed up for the Leading Change coaching one-on-one. It was for 45 minutes or 30 minutes thereabout. And then Dan was the person who was my coach. And then we talked about organizing, public narrative. It was fun. And then I was like, Joshua, I like your campaign. I think that WiLD will be able to support what you are doing in Nigeria. And then I'll tell you about the program itself. So for us in Nigeria, it's like between 9 p.m. and 10 p.m. our time. So it was a lot of sacrifice for us, but it taught me something about the fact that as a leader, if you cannot sacrifice, then it means that your goal is not so important to you. So that was what that taught me. So every Tuesday and Thursday for 2 hours, we stay up in the night. Sometimes there's no power, and then so that was how it was for us. And then when we had to organize people, one of the first things we asked ourselves was that what are the powerful questions that when we ask, it tells a story. So for instance, when you ask someone like, what is your aspiration when it comes to decent work? What kind of a job do you want? Do you think that the skills you have right now is able to provide you with the jobs that you need? And I would say that when we had our own organizing statement, and I can remember very well that when we had our organizing statement, that we just wanted to create an action plan. And Dan said something. He said, you need to make sure that your goal is exciting. And when you have the numbers around it, it's easier for you to be able to mobilize people. And in mobilizing people, we talked about our leadership across Nigeria. How do we get young people to lead? Currently, we have 57 champions across Nigeria. This is something we've been operating with about 12 members, but right now we have 57 champions and then over 3,700 volunteers across the country, 3,700 volunteers across the country. And I would say something that when going through WiLD, one of the things it taught us was how do we mobilize people itself. And when we did our call for application, in under 2 hours, or I'll say in under 24 hours, we have over 3,000 people who signified interest in being part of the campaign. And then we had to shut down in less than a week. We had over 7,000 people who signed up to be volunteers for the campaign. But unfortunately, we just needed about 3,700 of them. And out of the 3,700, we could only take 57 as on our core leadership team. So it was very competitive. And I'll say this thing that I share with my team today, the fact that how well we've gone, we had to organize online. And one of the targets was that we needed to ensure we do a survey and we get about 10,000 young people to fill the survey. And then being on the WiLD project, it taught us how to mobilize online. And I'll tell you that our survey, we didn't just get 10,000 people to respond to it. We got about 213,000 people who filled our survey. And when we shared it with people in government, they were like, wow, this is amazing. Like, it's the biggest survey that's ever been done by any government parastatal in Nigeria that has to do with decent work. And it was so inclusive because we thought about everybody. And then finally, right now, we're working around youth labs across the country. And I would say that being on the WiLD project has been able to help us develop leaders. And like, it's like having me in about 57 other people. You have people who reach out to me and say, oh, we love how you lead us. We love how you listen to us. And we love how you explain every process of the campaign itself. And I would say that 7 months, 8 months ago, I would not have thought that I would be able to do what we've done today if I had not been a part of the WiLD project itself. If I've not gone through the organizing, if I've not gone through all of the 8 weeks training. And I would say for everybody, if you really want to make change and then you want that change to last, I would advise that you sign up for this, because for us as an organization, it has transformed how we do things. And just this morning, we got a message from the International Labour Organization, and they said, Joshua, we are so glad that you are the team we are working on this project. And for the first time, we can be able to say in Nigeria, our work is being noticed when it comes to mobilizing young people. And this has been awesome. The way I tell my story is different. Now, I remember when I joined the program, the way I share stories about my milestones, it's not the same now. Like, it's better. Everywhere we go to, and we try to pitch a project for young people, all the organization, none of them say no to us. They just tell us, how do you know what we are planning? How do you understand the milestones we want to achieve with So if it had not been for WiLD, I'll tell you that most of the things we got so far, we would not have gotten them. Thank you.
Thank you, Joshua. For those who don't know, Joshua's on our new promo reel. By the look of a few faces, it looks like there might be some other folks who wish they had the organizing challenge of having 7,000 volunteers sign up and only being able to take 3,000 of them. Really inspiring, Joshua, to hear the important work that you and Adenike and Goodness and the rest of the team in Nigeria are making happen as we speak. So thank you for sharing that. Before we open it up to our team for questions, just want to come back and just capture and underscore a few of the learnings that came out of the Academy. I think, again, under this banner of at least our hope on the front end was how we designed a course that can be a real vehicle for launching organizing campaigns. So here are kind of the three buckets. The first, we've already named this a few times, but I think the significance we not only learned in this Academy, but in doing these trainings for years is the difference in an individual going through the training versus the team. And not surprising, I feel like a number of these learnings are in many ways just reminders of kind of getting back to the basics of this work that sometimes I feel like can be missed. Yeah, I mean, just the significance of a group coming through, a group having a shared language, a shared experience, being able to do the work of, during the training itself, forming their team, creating a strategy, and coming out the other end. Maybe even like, maybe even a little more amplified for people going back to existing organizations that have an existing culture of a way of doing things, have just, I think it's still challenging even when a team goes back and has had this experience, but I think that much more if it's just an individual. So a lot of one other thing on the team, also found that it doesn't always work out this way, but when you have someone that is in a decision-making role within the organization, someone in leadership that is in that team, just can be very significant, right, in going back in this, being brought to life. The second, just a number of things around bounding of a team. I think the first is the importance of having someone that is doesn't need to be a paid person necessarily, but someone who is in a coordination role from that group. Someone in many cases, even before the training starts, the person who is taking the lead, and that was certainly the case with Joshua, Bill, NECA, in recruiting their team. But then also helping bound and keep them together, hold them accountable, and giving them the encouragement and support as they were going throughout. So that having that key lead person in a coordination role on the team. The second was just the teams actually meeting before they even got into the academy. So like this, having a pre-course team meeting where the group is able to sit down or virtually like really clarify their purpose, making a commitment not only to the academy for the 8 weeks, because we found on average it was 7 to 10 hours of time a week, but also to each other. And then the third, and this was also the case, I'm just thinking of Bill with Western Wisconsin Votes, teams that had a regular scheduled meeting outside of the course time. I think Western Wisconsin Votes met every Friday at 12 noon, and that was the time where they were able to just do some more digesting of what they were learning, but also as a way to discuss and decide on how they were going to apply and move forward. And then the last thing is just on the adaptations to online. So I think, name this already. Don't try to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of learning and wisdom already out there. The second, haven't named this yet, but it's real, right? The technology. And how do you prepare people? In this case, we use Zoom and Google Classroom as our learning platform. I think one adjustment we're going to make going into 2021 is we're actually going to require it, not from a place of being rigid, but just require that everyone comes through a very introductory training on the technology so they're familiar. Because there were some folks who actually, I think, got behind because 2-3 weeks in, we were finding out that they didn't totally understand how to use Google Classroom, and wish we would have done that on the front end. Can't say this enough, this timing and having a sense of urgency, I think, was part of why we had a much larger response. We were able to take advantage of the presidential, among other things. And anything else here I want to name? I'm bringing that line. Yeah, I think we're continuing to think about more in maybe varying ways to create spaces for reflection. We had people every week that were writing reflection papers. But there were some people clearly that was not their way of reflecting. So I think learning from, just a lot of the folks, possibly opening up video recording, more opportunities to meet with the coach as a way to digest. And I think the last thing was just a learning around moving people into action. And I think this time around, we're going to front end the course with some work on strategy. Because what happened to us in this 8-week period of time, even though it was much more than the 3 days that we typically do in person, is we didn't cover strategy and get into real detail until week 5. So by the time people had a chance to develop their strategy and start to feel like they barely were getting their legs underneath them, the course was already done. So I think we're going to try to front end the course to really ground it in some of the energy people have in wanting to get moving into action. Whew, that was a lot. I'm going to stop and open it up for some questions. If folks can put any questions, curiosities that came up for you in the chat, and then we'll open it up for the team to respond here. Maybe try to group a few of these.
Yeah, maybe to get us rolling and invite folks to put other questions in the chat, or feel free to raise your blue hand. I think there's still blue hands. But I think there are two questions that were kind of pending. One from Mary. Maybe Mary, you can kick us off, and then Lisa, if you'd like to share your question.
I was just wondering what the WiLD curriculum, the foundation of it was based on, research, evidence, authors that you used, articles that, I'm just curious as to that.
Yeah, thanks, Mary. Yeah, we based a lot of it off of a lot of the work that had already been done by Marshall Gans and a whole network of folks who've drawn on a lot of the rich history of social movement work, organizing, various cultures and contexts and campaigns. So something that's taught over the semester course at Harvard, and then of course adapted it online.
And then I think we got blue hands coming up. That's a good sign. So we'll go in the order of the blue hands after Lisa, who I think was had a pending question from previous. If you'd like to share that question, Lisa.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jake. And this question is really something I've been thinking about since a conversation recently with a friend who's organizing food and housing insecure folks in our local community in North Carolina. Predominantly people who identify as Black. And the question is about the identities of your training team, how many trainers are involved, what life experiences and identities do they bring to the training, and if there are instances in which you aren't able to have a more diverse training team, how do you navigate that? I'm looking at, potentially as a white homeowner, having to navigate this with folks who don't have any of my advantages.
Yeah, well, thanks for asking the question. We'll open this up to the team as well. I think obviously diversity of a training team is very important, not just along lines of race, but also skill, experience, in some cases, diversity of causes and organizing campaigns that they've come out of. Also, for this one, found it, there was a ton of light bulbs that went off for people when we brought in Mice, who had some experience in organizing in the Middle East, experiences to share. Ana Babovic from Serbia shared her campaign and the work that they've done over there with Serbia on the Move. Both having a commitment to that is important, but for the learning. I think the other is something that is a work in progress, certainly with WiLD, is a commitment towards developing people, particularly if you're finding yourself on the front end of maybe not representing the diversity of the people you're wanting to engage. A commitment to developing others as trainers, right? And what it looks like to onboard and have, ideally people should be up in the training roles, right? That are very reflective of the communities that they're engaging with the whole belief that those closest to the problem are also closest to the solution. So feel free if anyone on the training team wants to to know there's a lot of experience on Zoom right now to share that as well.
Oh, I can jump in real quick. I think it's a good question, and one I think that should be raised often. So appreciate it. I think in addition to what work you can do beforehand to design your team, right? I think that's where you can start. In a state like Wisconsin, for example, I experience a lot of spaces where I might be the only woman or the only person of color or the only woman of color, right? And I think that is in part due to the makeup of the state, right? So if I want to do organizing in the state, I need to not just have an eye towards visual differences, but also I think differences in thought. Now, I also think, particularly in the WiLD experience, there was, I don't know that I would define the core training team as like hyper diverse, but I would say that all the people, at least in my experience, that were on our training team, I in many ways I experienced them central, like make central the question around identity, particularly of participants. And I can even remember, you know, having one-on-one where we're thinking through how do we introduce this framework, you know, with folks of different backgrounds or experiences on the team. And so I think it's not just, you know, designing the team, which I think certainly that's where it can start, but on the team having almost a norm or, you know, a community agreement around grappling, like being willing to grapple with these issues in the midst of the actual academy, right? Because I think those things come up, right, all the time, and they're in every, you know, facet of our lives. It certainly would make sense that they would present themselves, those issues present themselves in the training. And so if a training team is unwilling to address those or unwilling to learn how to address those issues, that I think is where the problem is. But when there's a group of people who are like, let's put some actual time, right, this resource that is priceless, into figuring out how to do that, that's when I think you have a solid team. And I personally experienced that in the WiLD Academy.
Thanks, Nneka. Thanks for the question. Want to get to a few of the hands. Jake, do you know the order?
Got the order, yeah. Thanks for that question, Lisa. Really, really important one. Maria, I think, is next. Then we'll hear from Clarence.
I have just so many questions. I don't know which one to pick. I'm wondering if you could talk a little more about the actual like logistics behind the technology in the Zoom and how it worked with like breaking up people into their teams. How did you navigate all of that? And if I have time for one more question, I want to know if you can talk a little more about the team structure 2.0 and like what went into that.
That's good. Thanks for the question. Yeah, on the tech front, I would say one important lesson was to have one person who's completely like, in this case, it was Ben Barker, and he can feel free to jump in if he has anything he wants to add, who's like sole responsibility is holding down the technology. Because there's just so many moving pieces, and yeah, of course, like bringing this online, it's not like being in a training in a room together, right? And if the lights or something goes off, you can still like find a way forward. If the tech goes down, you lose your moment of that day. So yeah, I'd say having someone designated to that and who is like very capable and trained to do all of the movements that are required. And there are many, right? You already named them. Moving into breakouts, all the stuff that comes up with people that are having tech challenges on the spot, having a hard time logging in or turning on their video camera or muting. Yeah, again, I think this time around, we're actually going to have a technology training before people even start the course. So they're feeling much more comfortable, particularly for those who have less experience on Zoom and in Google Classroom. So I'd say those are a few on the tech front. Yeah, 2.0, I think you should just come to the WiLD Academy. Get it firsthand. Yeah, as Jake shared, I think it was really just a way to think more intentionally about beyond just the inner core of like a core group's snowflake and their structure. You know, a lot of people had really, as you heard from Nigeria and the work that folks did in Western Wisconsin and in Houston, like really ambitious goals and things that they wanted to make happen. So just found like it was really valuable. And this is something we often don't have the time for in the 3-day training, but to start imagining like the next layers of the snowflake and how they can begin. Yeah, just thinking about how many new people they need to invite into the mix to get in the ballpark rate of achieving their goal. thank you for those questions. Who's next in the lineup?
Yeah, we're gonna have, I'll just, one quick addition on the structure 2.0. I think what Joshua shared earlier is a great example of it, is that question. So we form a core team, but then the question is, where do we actually need leadership, and how are we going to form teams? Not just like, where do we need people, but how are we going to form teams and where those teams need to be? And that helps us start to think, okay, we need a team in this neighborhood, and this, who do I know in that neighborhood who could take the lead there? How are we going to get folks there versus just kind of general numbers? And so that was a lot of what we were digging into in the structure 2.0 piece, which I know, Maria, you've got experience in reflecting on that as well. So hopefully it's a useful thing. I think next we're going to hear from Clarence. Clarence?
Yeah, so I've got two questions, if that's okay, and I'll try to make them quick. The first question goes back to something Dan said. The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. So instead of mobilizing people right now for the problem right now, how do you get people to see the urgency of organizing now instead of waiting for a crisis? And then second, for the lady from Houston, I am wondering regarding the Black Lives Matter protests, did anybody take it upon themselves to do any kind of systematic study and reading of the literature on strategic nonviolent resistance, such as Gene Sharp's books? And did anybody ever step up to do trainings on strategic nonviolent resistance, and specifically on the role of maintaining nonviolent discipline? Because you mentioned that everybody was just doing whatever came to their minds. And I saw that in Portland, and I think that really diluted the effectiveness of the Black Lives Matter protests and allowed agents provocateurs to come in and cause trouble. So those are my two questions.
Thanks for the easy questions, Clarence. Appreciate that. Kidding. Yeah, and said much more eloquently. 20 years, how do you get people motivated to see the reason to be planting trees much earlier? So I hand that over to the team, folks who have been in the middle of it. Bill, Mecca, Joshua, Jake. Again, I know there's a lot of organizing experience beyond our team on this call. Feel free to put it in the chat. Thoughts on how to create urgency now for building, realizing there are going to be many battles to be fought over time.
I'm curious Bill's thoughts on this, because I know it's been there's an effort. I mean, Bill's organizing in Western Wisconsin, where progressive voices have been minimized for a long time. And I know it's been kind of thinking about the long haul. I'm curious, Bill, if you have some thoughts on that question, how it's fit in with the WiLD Academy.
I don't have any answers. I just have questions. And they're questions I'm grappling with right now in terms of the way rural people vote and how we do that deeper work, and the fact that it's on a longer time frame than usually an electoral cycle offers us. So I'm grappling with the same questions, and don't have any silver bullets of answers. But I agree. I love the quote, best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. I wrote that down, Clarence, so thanks.
I can say one thing, maybe partly based on some of the work. So in my section was a group that Bill had recruited from Western Wisconsin. And again, no easy answers here, Clarence, as I'm sure you know, on that question of how to motivate the work, to build the foundation that allows you to actually build over time and not just in this moment, not to kind of burn it all out right now. I think what felt helpful for that group, so there's a group of 7 folks from Western Wisconsin who had various levels of engagement in any kind of politics or any kind of activism prior to the academy, but had felt called in this particular moment to step up. And I know a number of them have actually continued to step up, and actually one of the women who would come in our one-on-one before the course, she said, I've never done anything political before, right? She'd actually, when we uncovered her story, she'd been very active in her community in different ways, but never thought of herself in that way. I think she's now stepping up to help lead some of the efforts going forward in that community. And I think the way in which the course puts a lot of time and focus on people, like stories and relationships at the foundation, instead of diving right into, okay, what's our issues, how are we going to solve the issues, helps kind of set an atmosphere for, okay, we're in this for a little bit more than just what's the issue. We're in this for each other, and there's something that's deeper that's calling us. So yeah, not that that is like a perfect formula or necessarily deals with all the issues, but I think that's just one example on how, at least I observed in the course of the academy, like the deepening of commitment and the sense of a larger time horizon. I don't know if that speaks a little bit to what you're asking there, Clarence, but yeah, that's what came up for me there.
Thanks, Jake. Nneka, you want to take Clarence's second question?
Sure, yeah. I think the question was around the study, like what study did we maybe do, what perhaps even what our thought was around nonviolent protests, and that, like looking maybe to history to understand a way forward, perhaps, as I understood your question. Please feel free to re-clarify if I'm missing it, but you know,
could I just jump in? So
yeah,
there's
please.
a lot of books that have been written on how to do strategic nonviolent resistance, books by people like Gene Sharp. There's Sergej Popovich, who's with Canvas. There's a lot of literature on that subject, and I'm just wondering if anybody from the Black Lives Matter group took the time to read that and to actually implement trainings, and specifically for the maintenance of nonviolent discipline during protest. Because the fact that everybody was just doing everything allowed troublemakers to come in and to dilute the original message. That's what happened in Portland.
Mm.
And so defunding the police is a strong goal, and I think it's something that should happen. But because the troublemakers were able to come in, they were able to blunt that message.
Appreciate you re-clarifying. You know, in my view, I'm not going to speak for the Black Lives Matter movement as one person who is a part of it, but I will say that the Houston protesters defense team was actually a team of lawyers. I would argue we're fairly well studied, many of us around social action. But what we saw was the attempt of different attorney groups to try and come and represent one-off clients here and there, when what you're talking about, the opposition or the troublemakers, as I viewed it, right, were, you know, oftentimes the police, right? There'd be a 60,000 person march downtown Houston. Art Acevedo, the chief of police, would come and speak. You know, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee come and speak, Mayor Sylvester Turner, these public figures all throughout Houston. And as soon as the majority, meaning about 30,000, left to go home and the sun started to set, things became altogether very different. And Art's police force began to issue out and deal out the same brutality those people came out and protested. And so I think our calling wasn't so much, how do we adjust how people are protesting? Houston protests were, I would argue, almost entirely peaceful. It was the police on horses coming to trample protesters. It was Art Acevedo ordering his forces to use rubber bullets against protesters. It was the sheriff's department removing people's masks in a pandemic and not feeding them while in detention for 12 to 13 hours. So that was the nonviolence that was occurring. I think our, the members of our team were working to combat that, right? So I think there was a lot of study done as I observed it, though I can't speak for everyone. I wasn't in all of the spaces that were organizing the protests, but I was in many of the spaces where particularly Black lawyers and Black women lawyers we're trying to grapple with how do we organize ourselves so that when we go to the courtroom, our effect isn't one person or two people, but 300-400 people who have been arrested in one night, who are college students, had no clue, had no criminal history, had no idea the impact of what this might, happen. And so the win for going towards the district attorney and trying to get this sweeping dismissal was not, just like, oh, great, we did our jobs well as lawyers, but really a shift towards, we can actually see when we work together outside of the courtroom to affect change, that our impact can be even broader. We can implement the tools that we learn, not just in the WiLD Academy, but as we're practicing. So I think, there's a lot to be said around the messaging, around defund the police or abolish the police, which I'm in support of. But I don't know that my work was necessarily tied to violent or peaceful protest. It was tied to addressing the police violence that was happening, even in the midst of people crying out for change.
Thanks, Neka. Thanks again, Clarence, for the question. I'm getting the time cue from Sachiko. Before I turn it over her, just to wrap us up here, want to extend an invitation for those of you who are interested in joining us for the 2021 WiLD Academy. Our team, actually, our core team is on the call here. We've got Neka, Jake. I don't think people have met Courtney Malone yet. Courtney, you want to give a shout out?
Hi, happy to join. Excited for WiLD. Join us. Bye.
So yeah, this is going to be our core crew. And then Ben Barker is going to be holding down technology again. We, much like last time, we're opening this up far beyond Wisconsin. I know for some of you, the time difference could be a challenge, but kind of moved by what Joshua said, and just thinking about sacrifice and time and what time you come on in connection to what you are trying to make happen in the world. So yeah, the invitation, to consider the door open. The registration deadline is coming up soon. It's just about a week out on December 21st. We are prioritizing people joining in teams of 3 to 9 people with an organizing project focus. Starts end of January. You can see the times, 4 to 6 p.m. Central. Cost is $600 a person on a sliding scale. So for me early on in the team and watching WiLD, is a commitment that cost would not be a barrier to participation, particularly for those who are hungry and ready to get rolling. So yeah, check us out. I put in the chat the link for more info. If you want to explore and just talk through a possibility of a team, feel free to reach out to me directly. Happy to have that conversation. But otherwise, thank you. Want to lift up our team again. Neka, Bill, Jake, Ben, and the rest of the crew that helped us make this WiLD Academy happen earlier in the year. So over to you, Sachiko. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dan. Thank you. All right. So I feel like everyone has a lot more questions, but feel free to put them in the chat. And again, I put the link for the WiLD Academy 2021. So definitely check it out. So before we end, I would like to ask everyone to put in the chat their reflections from today. So pluses, deltas, but mainly key learnings. What were your main takeaways from today's session and the presentation by Dan and his team? And as everyone is doing that, I just want to take a minute to share what's coming up ahead at LCN. So on December 17th, we will be having our final learning session of the year, which is around skill practice circles on coaching. So it's going to be a space for people to practice coaching skills with each other. So it's a great chance for you to come stretch your coaching muscles and practice with other fellow members, and also get coached on your challenge. And heading over to 2021, we will have our orientation to organizing in January 13th for an introductory session to learn the organizing pedagogy. So more details going to be shared in the coming week. So keep an eye out for that. We're also going to resume our monthly meetups. The date for this will be announced before the holidays. And the South Asia Network, LCN, is going to organize a meetup late February to early March. So that's also another exciting thing that's coming up. And there's going to be more exciting events that are being cooked right now, and we will be announcing the details for this as soon as they're confirmed. All right, and last but not least, make sure you check out the WiLD Academy 2021. All right, so thank you so much for today's session. Thank you everyone, Dan, Jake, Nick, Bill, Joshua, for sharing your learning and insights, and thank you for each one of you for joining us today. So I'm gonna stop sharing right here so we can see all of our faces. Just wanna give a big thank you again, and hope to see you soon in our future events. But first of all, have a very amazing weekend ahead. Thank you all.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you, everyone. Good seeing you all.
Thanks, everyone. Good to be with you.
You all.